My name is Aliyah. I'm 28 years old, and I was born into a life that many people would call perfect. But perfection can be the most convincing disguise for imprisonment. I grew up in a royal household in Saudi Arabia, where everything was controlled, from the way I dressed to the way I spoke, and most of all, the way I believed. Islam was not just our religion, it was our identity, our law, our honor, and questioning. It was not just rebellion, it was betrayal. I remember being a child sitting beside my mother as she corrected my recitation of the Quran, her voice calm but firm as she said, "Again." And I would repeat the words over and over, not understanding them, just memorizing, because understanding was never required, only obedience. I learned early that asking questions brought silence into the room, the kind of silence that felt like a warning, so I stopped asking and started performing. I became what they expected, what they needed, a daughter who obeyed, a woman who submitted, a princess who never stepped out of line. But inside me, something was slowly suffocating. There was a quiet emptiness that followed me everywhere, even in rooms filled with people, even during prayer, even when I smiled for guests who admired my life. I remember standing in front of a mirror once, fully dressed in elegance, and asking myself a question I was too afraid to say out loud: who am I when no one is watching? And the answer was nothing. I felt like nothing beneath the layers of expectation and control, and that realization terrified me more than anything else ever had. Because if I was nothing, then what was the purpose of all this perfection? Why did I feel so empty when I had everything people dreamed of? That question began to grow inside me, quiet at first, but persistent, like a whisper that refused to be silenced. I tried to drown it with prayer, with routine, with obedience, but it only grew louder until one day I caught myself thinking, is this really the truth? The moment that thought formed in my mind, I froze. I whispered astaghfirullah under my breath, as if I had committed a crime. Because in my world, even thinking like that was dangerous. But no matter how hard I tried, I could not unthink it. And that was the beginning of everything changing. I started noticing things I had ignored before, the fear in people's obedience, the way questions were shut down before they could even be formed, the weight of expectation that pressed down on everyone around me. I began to feel like I was living inside something I did not fully understand, and that realization made me feel both curious and afraid at the same time. I did not know what I was searching for, but I knew something was missing, and that missing piece felt more important than everything I had been taught to protect. If you're listening to me right now, and you have ever felt that quiet emptiness, that silent questioning that you're too afraid to voice, then maybe this story is for you. And before I go further, I want to say this gently. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe truth should be heard no matter how uncomfortable it is, then take a moment to subscribe, like, and share, because voices like mine are often silenced, and when we finally speak, it matters more than you can imagine. I lived most of my life believing I already had the truth, but deep inside I felt like I was starving for something I could not name, something I could not reach, something that felt just beyond my understanding, and no amount of obedience could satisfy that hunger. I followed every rule, every expectation, every tradition, and still I felt empty, like I was living someone else's life instead of my own. And the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became, until it reached a point where silence was no longer possible. I began to realize that whatever I had been taught was not answering the questions inside my heart, and that realization was both terrifying and freeing at the same time, because it meant everything I believed could be wrong. And if it was wrong, then what was right? I did not know it yet. But I was standing at the edge of a path that would cost me everything I'd ever known, and at the same time lead me to something more real than anything I'd ever experienced. But at that moment, all I felt was the tension between fear and curiosity, a battle inside me that I could not escape. And then one day, something happened that seemed small, almost insignificant. A simple conversation I was not meant to hear. But that moment would change the direction of my life forever. It was the beginning of a journey I never expected to take. A journey that would strip me of everything I thought defined me and reveal a truth I had been searching for without even realizing it. And as I stood there listening, heart pounding, something inside me whispered again. Not with fear this time, but with anticipation. And I knew deep down that once I took this step, there would be no going back. It started with something I was never supposed to hear. In our home, conversations were controlled, measured, and often guarded, especially around people like me. I was not meant to question, only to inherit what had already been decided. But that afternoon, as I walked past the servants' quarters, I heard a voice I didn't recognize. It was soft, unfamiliar, carrying an accent that wasn't local. I slowed my steps without meaning to, my heart already sensing something unusual. The woman was speaking quietly to one of the older maids, and then I heard a name that made my body tense without understanding why. She said, Jesus. The way she said it was not how I had ever heard it before. It wasn't with dismissal or correction, but with something else. Something gentle, almost reverent. I should have walked away. Every instinct shaped by my upbringing told me to leave, to pretend I had heard nothing, but I didn't. I stood there, hidden just beyond the doorway, listening. She spoke about him as if he were alive, as if he were present, as if he knew her. That confused me more than anything. In my world, Isa was a prophet, respected, yes, but distant, not someone you spoke about with closeness. But this woman spoke as if she had a relationship with him, and that thought unsettled me deeply. That night, I could not sleep. Her words echoed in my mind over and over again, not loud, but persistent. I tried to push them away by reciting familiar verses, but they felt empty, like words I had memorized without ever truly touching. The next day, I found myself thinking about it again, wondering who she was, where she had come from, and why she spoke with such certainty. It didn't make sense to me, and yet it stirred something I could not ignore. Days passed, but the curiosity did not fade. It grew. It followed me into my prayers, into my silence, into the quiet moments when no one was watching. I began to feel restless, like something inside me was being pulled towards something unknown. I fought it at first. I told myself it was dangerous, that even entertaining these thoughts could lead to consequences I was not prepared to face. But curiosity is a powerful thing, especially when it is mixed with emptiness. One evening, alone in my room, I did something I had never done before. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone. I hesitated for a long moment, staring at the screen as if it could see my thoughts. Then slowly, and almost as if I were being watched, I typed a single word into the search bar: Bible. My heart began to race immediately. I looked over my shoulder even though I was alone. It felt wrong, forbidden, like crossing an invisible line I'd been warned about my entire life. When the results appeared, I hesitated again, my finger hovering over the screen. This was the moment I could still turn back, pretend this had never happened. But something inside me refused. I downloaded a Bible app. The moment it finished installing, I felt a wave of fear wash over me. What if someone saw it? What if it was discovered? What if this one small decision changed everything? But despite the fear, I opened it. The first time I read from it, I did not understand everything, but I felt something I had never felt before. It was not fear. It was not pressure. It was not obligation. It was peace. A quiet, unfamiliar peace that settled over me in a way I could not explain. The words felt alive, like they were speaking directly to something deep inside me that had been waiting to be seen. I quickly locked my phone, my breath unsteady, as if I had just done something irreversible. And maybe I had. From that night on, I began to read in secret. Every moment was filled with tension. I would listen carefully before opening the app, making sure no one was nearby. My eyes would scan the door again and again, my heart racing at every sound. But still, I kept reading. I couldn't stop. There was something about those words that drew me in, something that made me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced before. It was as if someone understood my emptiness without me having to explain it. One night, and as I read quietly under the dim light of my room, I came across a verse that made me pause. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I read it again, slowly, letting each word sink in. Weary, burdened. Those words describe me more accurately than anything I'd ever admitted out loud. And then the promise, "I will give you rest." I felt something shift inside me at that moment. Not dramatically, not loudly, but deeply. A question formed in my heart, stronger than any before it. What if this is true? I sat there in silence, staring at the screen, my heart pounding as the weight of the question settled over me. Because if it was true, then everything I had been taught would have to be questioned. And questioning meant danger, real danger. But for the first time in my life, the possibility of truth felt more powerful than the fear of consequences. I closed my phone slowly, my hands still trembling, but my heart no longer felt the same. Something had been awakened in me, something I could not ignore, something that refused to go back to sleep. And as I lay there that night, staring into the darkness, I realized that I had already taken a step I could not undo. And deep down, I knew this path, however dangerous it might be, was leading me somewhere I had been searching for my entire life, even if I did not fully understand it yet. At first, I told myself I was being careful. I convinced myself that no one would notice, that I had mastered the art of hiding long before this secret ever entered my life. But there is something about truth that refuses to stay hidden, no matter how quietly you try to hold it. It finds a way to rise, to reveal itself in the smallest details. And in a house where everything was observed, even silence could become suspicious. Her name was Samira, my personal maid. She had been with me for years, long enough to understand my routines, my moods, even the way I folded my hands when I was anxious. She was quiet, obedient, and almost invisible in the way she carried out her duties. But something about her presence began to change. Or maybe it wasn't her that changed. Maybe it was me. I started noticing the way her eyes lingered just a second too long. The way she would enter my room without knocking, as if testing whether she would catch me off guard. The way her silence began to feel heavier, no longer neutral, but watchful. The first time I felt it clearly was one evening when I quickly locked my phone as she walked in. It was a small movement, almost instinctive, but she saw it. I knew she saw it. Her gaze dropped briefly to my hand, then back to my face, and in that moment, something passed between us that words could not explain. Suspicion. I forced a calm expression, pretending nothing was unusual, but inside, my heart began to race. From that day on, everything felt different. I became hyper-aware of every movement, every sound, every glance. Reading the Bible was no longer just a secret. It was a risk that followed me like a shadow. I started choosing my moments more carefully, late at night when the house was quiet, or early in the morning before anyone was awake. But even then, the fear remained. Because deep down, I knew that if Samira suspected something, it would only be a matter of time before she acted on it. In our world, loyalty was not personal, it was hierarchical. and her loyalty was not to me. Days passed in a tense, suffocating silence. I tried to act normal, to maintain the version of myself that everyone expected to see. But something inside me had already shifted, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not fully return to who I had been before. The words I had been reading had begun to change me in ways I could not hide completely. My expressions, my pauses, even my prayers felt different. And people noticed difference. One night, I made a mistake. It was small, but in a place like that, small mistakes carry heavy consequences. I was sitting on my bed, the room dimly lit, my phone in my hand as I read quietly. I had reached another passage that made my chest tighten. Something about truth setting you free. And I was so absorbed in the words that I didn't hear the door open. "My lady." Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. I froze. Slowly I looked up, and there she was, standing just inside the room, her eyes fixed on me. Not curious, not confused, certain. I quickly locked my phone, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mind raced, searching for something to say, something to undo what had just happened. "It's nothing," I said quickly, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just reading." She didn't respond immediately. She stepped further into the room, her gaze never leaving mine. "Reading what?" she asked, her tone neutral, but there was something beneath it, something sharp. I hesitated, just for a second. But that second was enough. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and I saw it then, the confirmation of her suspicion. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. "A story," I said finally. It sounded weak, even to me. She took another step closer, and I felt the air in the room shift, heavy with unspoken tension. "May I see?" she asked. My chest tightened. Every instinct in me screamed no, but I couldn't say it outright without revealing more than I already had. I forced a small smile, trying to maintain control. "It's nothing important," I said, "just something to pass time." But she didn't move. She didn't look away. And in that moment, I knew. She wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was testing me. The silence stretched between us, thick and unbearable. Finally, she gave a small nod, but it wasn't acceptance. It was acknowledgement. She had seen enough. "As you wish, my lady," she said quietly, before turning and walking out of the room. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but the sound echoed in my chest like something far louder. I sat there, frozen, my phone still in my hand, my heart racing. I knew what that moment meant. I knew what would come next. In our world, secrets like this did not stay buried. They were uncovered, exposed, judged. I tried to calm myself, to convince myself that maybe I was overthinking, that maybe she would keep it to herself. But deep down, I knew better. Loyalty in that house did not belong to individuals. It belonged to authority, and anything seen as a threat to that authority was reported. The next morning, everything changed. I was summoned. The message was delivered without explanation, but it didn't need one. My body felt heavy as I walked through the familiar halls, each step echoing louder than usual, as if the walls themselves were aware of what was about to happen. My mind replayed the night before, over and over, every detail, every glance, every word. By the time I reached the door, my hands were trembling. I paused for a moment, staring at the handle, knowing that once I stepped inside, there would be no turning back. My secret was no longer mine, and whatever happened next would change everything. The room felt colder than it ever had before, even though nothing about it had changed. The same polished floors, the same heavy curtains, the same familiar arrangement of chairs. Yet everything felt different, as if the air itself had turned against me. I stepped inside slowly, my eyes adjusting to the presence of those already waiting. My father sat at the head of the room, his posture straight, his expression unreadable, but I knew that look. It was the kind that came before judgment, not discussion. Around him were two men I recognized immediately, religious authorities, men whose words carried weight far beyond ordinary conversation. My mother sat to the side, silent, her gaze lowered, her hands tightly clasped together as if holding onto something invisible. No one greeted me. No one asked how I was. I was not there as a daughter. I was there as a problem. "Sit," my father said, his voice calm but firm. I obeyed without hesitation, lowering myself into the chair, placed directly across from him. The distance between us felt greater than it actually was, like a space filled with everything unsaid. One of the men cleared his throat, unfolding a paper in his hand. I didn't need to see it to know what it contained. "We have received a report," he began, his voice measured, controlled, "that you have been engaging in behavior that contradicts the teachings of Islam." The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to remain still. "You have been reading material that is forbidden," he continued, his eyes lifting to meet mine. "Specifically, the Bible." Hearing it spoken out loud sent a sharp wave through me, not because it was untrue, but because it was now real, no longer just a hidden part of me, but something exposed, something that could not be taken back. Silence followed his words, but it was not empty. It was filled with expectation, or with judgment, with the weight of everything I was about to say or not say. "Is this true?" my father asked. His voice was quieter now, but far more dangerous. I felt the pressure of the moment pressing in on me from all sides. This was my chance to deny it, to protect myself, to return to the life I had always known. One lie, and everything could go back to normal. But something inside me refused. The same quiet voice that had been growing within me would not allow it. I lifted my head slightly, meeting his gaze, and for the first time in my life, I did not look away. "Yes," I said. The word was simple, but it carried everything. My mother's breath caught softly beside me. One of the men shifted in his seat. My father's expression did not change, but I saw it in his eyes, the shift from concern to something colder. "Oh, do you understand what you're admitting to?" the second man asked, leaning forward slightly. I nodded, though my hands were beginning to tremble in my lap. "Then explain yourself," he said. "Explain." How could I explain something I barely understood myself? How could I put into words the feeling of reading something that made my soul feel alive for the first time? How could I describe a peace that did not come from fear or obligation, but from something deeper? I opened my mouth, but for a moment, no words came. Flashbacks flooded my mind, my childhood lessons, the warnings, the strict lines that had been drawn around what was acceptable and what was not. Everything I had been taught told me to stop, to retreat, to protect myself. But something stronger pushed forward. "I wanted to understand," I said finally, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Understand what?" one of them pressed. I hesitated, then spoke the truth I had been too afraid to say before. "Truth." The word landed heavily in the room. My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You are saying that what you have been taught your entire life is not truth?" he asked, his tone sharpening. I felt the weight of his question, not just as a father, but as a man whose authority I was now challenging. "I am saying I don't know anymore," I replied. It was the most honest answer I could give, and it was enough to seal my fate. The room shifted, the tension thickened. This was no longer a conversation, it was a verdict in progress. "Doubt is the doorway to corruption," one of the men said firmly. "And what you're engaging in is not curiosity, It is deviation. The words were harsh, final, leaving no room for nuance. I felt something rise inside me then, not anger, but clarity. For the first time, I saw the difference between fear and truth, and I knew which one I was being asked to choose. I didn't feel corrupted, I said quietly. All eyes turned to me. I felt peace. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. My father's gaze hardened. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through the room. "You will stop this immediately." It was not a request, it was a command. A familiar command, one I had followed my entire life. But this time, something was different. I sat there, feeling the weight of everything I was about to lose, and yet, beneath the fear, there was something else. A quiet strength I did not recognize as my own. "I can't," I said. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. The room seemed to freeze. My mother looked up suddenly, her eyes wide with shock. One of the men leaned back as if the air had shifted. My father's expression changed then, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that was far more dangerous. Calm, controlled, final. "Then you leave me no choice," he said. And in that moment I understood. This was no longer about correction. This was about consequence. I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The daughter they had raised, the obedient, silent, unquestioning daughter, no longer existed. And in her place stood someone they did not recognize, someone they could not control. I felt the reality of it settle over me, heavy and unavoidable. Everything was about to change, not slowly, not gradually, completely. And as I sat there, facing the people who had defined my entire life, I realized something that both terrified and steadied me at the same time. I had told the truth, and there was no going back. They did not argue with me after that. There were no long speeches, no emotional pleas, no attempts to understand what I was feeling. The decision was made quickly, coldly, as if it had already been prepared long before I entered that room. I was no longer seen as a daughter who needed guidance. I had become a risk that needed to be removed. My father stood, signaling the end of the conversation, though nothing had truly been resolved. "You will leave," he said, his voice steady, almost detached. "This matter will not bring disgrace to this family." Those were his final words to me in that moment. Not concern, not sorrow, just preservation of reputation. I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, not in a way anyone else could hear, but deeply. A fracture that would never fully heal the same way again. I was escorted out of the room without another word. My mother did not look at me, or maybe she couldn't. I don't know which hurt more. Everything that followed felt unreal, like I was watching my life happen from a distance. My belongings were packed for me, quickly and efficiently, as if I were a guest checking out rather than a daughter being cast out. No one spoke to me unless necessary. No one asked how I felt. It was as if I had already disappeared. By nightfall, I was gone. No farewell. No explanation to the outside world. Just silence. The kind of silence that hides uncomfortable truths behind closed doors. I was taken to a place far from the life I'd always known. A small, unfamiliar apartment in a part of the city I had never seen before. It was modest, almost bare, nothing like the home I'd grown up in. The driver who dropped me off did not meet my eyes. He simply placed my bag inside, nodded once, and left without a word. And just like that, I was alone, truly alone for the first time in my life. The silence in that small space felt different from the silence in the palace. There, silence was controlled, structured. Here it was open, uncertain, almost overwhelming. I stood in the middle of the room for a long moment, unsure of what to do next. There were no instructions, no expectations, no one watching me. And yet, I felt more exposed than ever. Fear crept in slowly, filling the emptiness around me. What would happen now? How would I survive? What if they came back for me? What if this was not the end, but just the beginning of something worse? My mind raced with questions, each one heavier than the last, and beneath all of them was a deeper fear, one I had not fully faced until that moment. Had I made a mistake? Had I just destroyed my entire life for something I did not even fully understand? The weight of that thought pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, my hands trembling as I covered my face. For the first time since everything began, I allowed myself to cry. Not quietly, not controlled, but fully. The kind of crying that comes from a place so deep, it feels like it might break you. I cried for what I had lost, for the family that had turned away from me, for the life that no longer belonged to me. And in the middle of that pain, another thought emerged, quieter but persistent. If everything was gone, then what was left? The answer came slowly, almost reluctantly. Truth. That was what I had chosen. That was what had brought me here. And now it was all I had. The realization did not bring immediate comfort, but it steadied me just enough to breathe again. After some time, I wiped my tears and sat in silence, staring at nothing in particular. My phone lay beside me, untouched. I knew what was on it. I knew what I had been reading. And for the first time, there was no one stopping me from opening it. No fear of being watched. No need to hide. Just me and the choice I had made. My hand still slightly unsteady, I reached for it. I hesitated for a moment, not out of fear this time, but out of awareness. Everything had changed. This was no longer curiosity. And this was all that remained. Slowly, I opened the Bible app. The screen lit up, casting a soft glow in the dim room. I didn't know where to start, so I simply began reading where I had left off. The words felt different now, not because they had changed, but because I had. Each sentence seemed to meet me exactly where I was, in my confusion, in my fear, in my loss. It was as if they understood me in a way nothing else ever had. Time passed without me noticing. The outside world faded away as I continued reading, each word settling into me, calming something that had been restless for so long. And then, without planning it, without even fully realizing what I was doing, I spoke. "If you are real," I whispered into the silence, my voice barely audible. "I need you." The words felt strange, unfamiliar, but also honest in a way I'd never experienced before. There was no script, no memorized lines, just a raw, desperate truth. The room remained silent. Nothing dramatic happened, no sudden change, no visible sign. And yet, something shifted. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable at first, like a gentle presence settling into the space around me. The fear that had been pressing down on me began to ease, just slightly. My breathing slowed, my thoughts quieted. I could not explain it, but I felt less alone. I stayed there for a long time, sitting in that stillness, not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing that something had begun. Something beyond my control, beyond my understanding. And as night fell deeper around me, I lay down on the thin mattress, exhaustion finally pulling me under. But even as my eyes closed, one thought remained, steady and undeniable. I had lost everything. But maybe, just maybe, I had found something far greater. And that night, in the quiet of that unfamiliar room, something beyond what I could see or understand began to unfold. That night did not feel like an ordinary night. Even before I closed my eyes, there was a stillness in the room that I could not explain, as if everything around me had slowed down, waiting. My body was exhausted, My mind was alert, replaying everything that had happened, every word, every decision, every consequence. I lay on the thin mattress, staring into the darkness, listening to the faint sounds outside, distant voices, a passing car, the hum of a world that continued as if mine had not just fallen apart. And yet, beneath all of that, there was something else, something quiet, something I could feel but not see. I don't know when I fell asleep, but when I did, it was not like any sleep I'd ever known. It felt deeper, heavier, like I'd stepped into something beyond rest. At first, there was nothing, just darkness. But it was not an empty darkness. It felt full, almost alive, like it was holding something back. Then slowly, a light began to appear in the distance. It was soft at first, barely noticeable, but it grew steadily, not harsh, not blinding, just warm. I found myself drawn toward it, not by force, but by something that felt like familiarity, like I had been searching for it without knowing. As I moved closer, the light began to take shape, not in a way I could fully describe, but enough for me to understand that I was not alone. There was a presence there. And then I saw him. I don't know how to explain it in words that will fully capture what I experienced, but I will try. He was not like anything I had imagined, not like the distant figure I had been taught about. There was no fear in his presence, no heaviness, no judgment pressing down on me. Instead, there was peace, overwhelming peace, the kind that settles deep into your soul and quiets everything else. He looked at me, not with condemnation, but with understanding, as if he knew every part of me, every thought I had ever hidden, every fear I had never spoken. And still, there was no rejection in his eyes, only love. I stood there, unable to move, unable to speak, overwhelmed by the weight of what I was feeling. It was too much, and yet it was exactly what I had been searching for. Aliyah, he said. My name. He spoke my name as if it mattered, as if I mattered. The sound of it broke something inside me. I felt tears rising, but I did not feel shame. You are not alone, he continued, his voice calm, steady, filling the space around me without force. Every word felt like it was reaching into places inside me I didn't even know existed. I have always seen you. The moment he said that, memories began to surface. Moments from my childhood, my loneliness, my silent questions, my hidden pain. It was as if he had been there through all of it, watching, understanding, waiting. Why me? I managed to whisper, my voice trembling, not with fear, but with something deeper, something like awe. Because you are mine, he said. The words were simple, but they carried a weight I cannot fully describe. They settled into me, not as a command, not as an expectation, but as truth. And a truth that did not demand anything from me, but instead offered everything. I felt myself begin to break, not in pain, but in release. All the fear, all the confusion, all the pressure I had been carrying seemed to lift, piece by piece. I lost everything, I said, the words coming out without thought, the pain still real, still present. He stepped closer, and though I cannot explain how, I felt his presence surround me completely. You have found what cannot be taken from you, he replied. And in that moment I understood, not fully, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to know that what I'd experienced, what I was feeling, was real. More real than anything I'd known before. There was no argument, no debate, no pressure. Just truth, quiet and undeniable. I wanted to stay there, in that moment, in that peace, forever. I did not want to return to the uncertainty, to the fear, to the reality waiting for me outside of this encounter. But slowly, the light began to fade, not abruptly, not violently, but gently. as if it was letting me go rather than pulling away. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice the last thing I heard clearly. And then I woke up. My eyes opened to the same small room, the same dim light filtering through the window. For a moment, I did not move. I just lay there, trying to understand what had just happened. My heart was racing, but not from fear, from something else. Something I had never felt before. Peace. Real peace. I sat up slowly, my hands resting on my lap, my mind searching for doubt, for any reason to dismiss what I had just experienced. But there was none. It had felt too real, too personal, too precise to be just a dream. I knew dreams. This was different. This had weight. This had truth. Tears filled my eyes again, but this time they were not from pain. They were from something deeper, something I did not yet have words for. I whispered his name, the way I'd heard it before, but now it felt different on my lips. Jesus. The room remained quiet, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt full, like something was with me even though I could not see it. I reached for my phone almost immediately, opening the Bible app with urgency, not fear. I needed to see if what I had experienced matched what I had been reading. As I scrolled, my eyes fell on words that made my breath catch. "I will never leave you nor forsake you." I read it again, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from recognition. That was what I'd felt. That was what he had said. In a different way, but the same truth. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it settle. Everything I'd feared losing suddenly felt smaller, less powerful, less defining. Because what I had encountered, what I had experienced, could not be compared to anything I had left behind. And in that moment, sitting alone in that small room, I realized something that changed everything. I was not searching anymore. I had found him. And now, the question was no longer what is true, but what will I do with it? Morning came, but it did not feel like any morning I had known before. The light that filtered through the thin curtains seemed softer, almost intentional, as if the world itself had changed overnight. I sat on the edge of the mattress, my hands resting on my knees, my mind still holding on to what I had experienced. One part of me expected doubt to rush in, to tear apart the memory, to convince me it had only been a dream born from exhaustion and fear. But it didn't. The peace remained, quiet, steady, unshaken, and that alone told me something had truly happened. But peace does not remove reality. It only changes how you face it. And reality came quickly. My phone vibrated on the floor beside me, the sudden sound breaking the stillness. I hesitated before picking it up, my heart tightening as I saw the number. It was from home. Not a personal call, not from my mother, not from someone who cared about how I felt, but from someone assigned to speak on behalf of the family. I already knew what it meant. I answered anyway. "Aliyah," the voice said, formal, controlled, distant. "You have been given time to reconsider your actions." I remained silent and listening. "Your father is willing to show mercy," he continued. "If you renounce what you have been doing and return to the path you were raised in, this matter can be resolved quietly." Mercy. The word echoed in my mind, but it did not feel like mercy. It felt like a condition, a transaction, truth in exchange for acceptance. My grip on the phone tightened slightly. "And if I don't?" I asked, my voice calm despite the tension rising in my chest. There was a brief pause, just long enough to make the answer heavier. "Then you will remain where you are," he said, "without protection, without support, without family." Each word landed deliberately, designed to remind me of everything I had already lost and everything I stood to lose permanently. I closed my eyes for a moment, the weight of it pressing in. This was the reality. This was the cost. "You are making a mistake," he added, his tone sharpening slightly. "Whatever you think you have found, it is not worth this." I opened my eyes slowly, staring at the blank wall in front of me. Not worth this. The words lingered, trying to plant doubt, trying to pull me back into fear. And for a moment, I felt it. The pull, the memory of everything I'd known, the comfort of belonging, even if it came with silence, the safety of obedience, even if it came with emptiness. I saw flashes of my past, my mother's presence, the structure of my old life, the familiarity of it all. It would be so easy to go back. One sentence, one denial, one step backward, and everything could be restored. But then, just as quickly, another memory rose. The light, his voice, the peace that had filled me in a way nothing else ever had. "Tin, you are not alone." The words echoed inside me, stronger than the fear. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "I can't go back," I said quietly. Silence filled the other end of the line, but it was not surprise silence. It was the silence of confirmation. "Then this is your choice," the voice replied coldly. "Do not expect another opportunity." The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, my hand still trembling slightly, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of what had just been decided. It was final now. There would be no return, no reconciliation, no second chance. The door had closed, completely. And for a brief moment, the reality of that hit me hard. The finality of losing my family, my name, my place in the world I had always known. It hurt, deeply. I will not pretend it didn't. I sat there, in the silence pressing in again, but this time it felt different. Not empty, not suffocating, just quiet. And in that quiet, the battle began. Not outside of me, but within me. Thoughts started to rise, questions, doubts, fears. What if you're wrong? What if this peace is temporary? What if you have misunderstood everything? The voices were subtle but persistent, trying to shake the foundation of what I had just experienced. I pressed my hands together, my fingers tightening as I tried to steady my thoughts. This was the war. Not physical, not visible, but real. A war between what I had always known and what I had just discovered. Between fear and truth. Between safety and conviction. I stood up slowly, pacing the small room as my thoughts continued to clash. I wanted certainty. I wanted something solid to hold on to beyond just a feeling, even a powerful one. And then I remembered the words I had read. I reached for my phone again, opening the Bible app with urgency. My eyes moved quickly across the screen until they landed on a passage I'd seen before, but never truly understood until now. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. I read it aloud this time, my voice steady, filling the room. Not fear. That alone struck something deep within me. Everything I'd known before had been rooted in fear, fear of punishment, fear of rejection, fear of stepping out of line. But what I had experienced the night before, that was not fear. That was peace. That was love. That was clarity. I read the verse again, slower this time, letting each word settle. Something inside me began to strengthen, like a foundation being rebuilt from the inside out. The doubts didn't disappear instantly, but they lost their power. They no longer felt like truth, just noise. I stopped pacing and stood still, my breathing steadying. "This is real," I whispered to myself, not as a question, but as a declaration. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. This was no longer curiosity. This was conviction. And conviction demands a decision. I closed my eyes briefly, not in fear, but in surrender. "I choose truth," I said softly. The words were simple, but they carried everything. I knew what it meant. I knew what it would cost. But for the first time in my life, I was not making a choice based on fear or expectation. I was choosing freely, and that freedom, even in the middle of loss, felt more real than anything I'd ever known. I opened my eyes again, looking around the small room that had become my entire world. It was empty, yes, but I was not. And as the weight of that realization settled into me, I felt something rise that I had never truly felt before. Not just peace, not just clarity, but strength. The kind of strength that does not come from control, but from truth. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I stopped counting the days after a while, not because time had disappeared, but because it no longer controlled me the way it used to. My life had become something small, hidden, and yet strangely vast on the inside. A quiet room, a simple routine, and a world that had officially erased my name. But inside that silence, something new was growing in me, something I did not fully understand yet. Oh, I was no longer reading the Bible out of curiosity or fear. I was reading it like someone searching for air after nearly drowning. Every word felt personal now, like it was being written, not just for history, but for me. And slowly, without announcement or ceremony, I began to pray. Not the structured prayers I'd always known, not the memorized movements and recitations, but something raw, something simple. God, I don't know how to do this, I would whisper in the quiet of the room. But if you are real, help me. There was no thunder, no dramatic sign, no sudden shift in the world around me. But there was something else, a steady calm that stayed even after I stopped speaking. It didn't answer my questions immediately, but it held me in them. One evening, while sitting near the window, I saw something on my phone that changed everything again. A message from an unknown contact. At first, I hesitated. In my world, unknown meant danger. But something in me pushed me to open it. It was simple, just a link and a sentence. "You're not alone. There are others who believe too." My heart began to beat faster. I stared at the screen, unsure if this was real or a trap. But after everything I had already lost, fear had begun to lose its authority over me. I clicked. It led me to an online Christian gathering. A small group meeting through video, people from different parts of the world, speaking, praying, sharing their stories. I did not turn my camera on. I did not speak. I just listened. And as I listened, something inside me broke quietly. Not in destruction, but in release. They spoke about Jesus as if he was not distant, not abstract, but present, real, personal. One woman spoke about her own journey from fear into faith, and I felt tears gather in my eyes without warning, because I understood her. I understood every word she said in a way I could not explain. It was not just information, it was recognition. After the meeting ended, I stayed sitting there, long after everyone had left the call. The screen went dark, but I didn't move. Something had shifted inside me. I was no longer just surviving alone. There were others who had walked through fear and come into something different, something alive. For the first time since my exile, I felt connected to something larger than my isolation. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the voices I had heard, the prayers, the peace in their words. And then, almost instinctively, I whispered again into the darkness, "If this is real, don't let me lose it." Days passed and I returned to the group again. And again. Each time I listened more closely. Each time I felt less like an outsider and more like someone being slowly welcomed into something I did not yet fully understand. But not everything was peaceful. Outside of those moments, reality still pressed in. Messages came through indirect channels, warnings disguised as concern. I was told I was being watched, that I was going too far, that there was still a chance to return before things became irreversible. Each message carried the same weight, fear dressed as mercy. I read them silently, my hands steady now in a way they never used to be. And for the first time, I did not feel the urge to collapse under them. I simply set the phone down and breathed. Because something had changed in me. The fear was still there, yes, but it no longer ruled me. One night, after another online gathering, I stayed awake longer than usual. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, my hands loosely clasped, and I realized something I had been avoiding. I had not just been learning about Jesus. I had been following him, quietly, inwardly, without announcement. And that realization brought both fear and peace at the same time. Fear, because I knew what it meant in my world. Peace, because I could not deny what was happening inside me. So I spoke again, this time not as a desperate whisper, but as a choice. Jesus, I choose you. The words felt final, like stepping off a ledge without knowing what's below. But instead of falling into emptiness, I felt something hold me. Not physically, not visibly, but deeply, like a foundation I had not seen before, but had suddenly discovered under my feet. I did not become fearless, but I became steady. And that steadiness gave me courage I did not know I had. I knew what came next would not be easy. I knew the cost was still real, still growing, still waiting. But I also knew something else now. I was not walking into it alone. And for the first time in my entire life, I was not choosing out of fear of consequences. I was choosing because I had found something worth losing everything for. The message arrived without warning, but I knew immediately it was not ordinary. There are tones in communication that carry weight even before you understand the words, and this one carried authority, finality, and something colder beneath it. It was a summons, not a request, a command disguised in formality. I read it 3 times before I could fully accept that it was real. My name was not used kindly. There was no warmth, no familiarity, just expectation. I was to return. One final meeting, one final opportunity to correct my path. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after reading it, feeling something I had not felt in a while. Not fear, exactly, but pressure. The kind that tries to pull you back into the shape of your old life. For a moment, I saw it clearly in my mind. The palace, the structure, the silence I used to live under. The version of me that never questioned, never resisted, never spoke back. It would be easier to go back, I thought. Easier to disappear again into obedience and forget everything that had happened. But then another memory rose. Not from my past life, but from what I had experienced since leaving it. The peace, the presence, the voice that had spoken to me not through fear, but through love. And I knew I could not go back. The meeting was arranged for the next day. I did not sleep that night, not because I was afraid of what they would say, but because I knew this moment would define everything that came after it. I prayed quietly in the dark, not asking for escape, but for strength. "Help me stand," I whispered. "Don't let me deny what I know." When the car arrived, I stepped into it without hesitation. The ride felt longer than before, as if the road itself understood the weight of where I was going. When we arrived, I was led into a private room. This one was different from the last. There were no religious authorities this time, only my father. That alone told me everything. This was no longer about doctrine, it was personal. He stood when I entered, not immediately speaking. He studied me for a long moment, as if searching for something familiar that no longer matched what stood before him. "You look different," he said finally. His voice was quieter than I expected. controlled, but not as sharp. I did not answer. I simply stood across from him. The silence between us stretched, heavy, familiar, and yet changed. "This is your last chance," he said, "before things become irreversible." I felt the weight of those words, but they no longer had the same power over me. Irreversible had already happened inside me. "You were raised with honor," he continued, "with truth, with guidance, and you're throwing it away for confusion." I looked at him then, truly looked at him. Not as authority, not as fear, but as a man who could not understand what I had seen. "I'm not confused," I said softly. The room tightened instantly, not loudly, but perceptibly, like air being pulled from a space. He stepped closer. "Then explain it," he said. "Explain what is worth losing your family for." I paused, because how do you explain an encounter that reshapes your entire inner world? How do you describe peace to someone who has only known control? I took a breath. "I met Jesus," I said. My voice did not shake, and I cannot deny what he has done in me. His expression hardened, not in anger at first, but in disbelief. "There's no place for that here," he said immediately. "You are speaking nonsense." But I did not step back. For the first time in my life, I stood still in front of him without shrinking. "This is not nonsense," I said. "Wait, this is my life." The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. He looked at me like he was seeing someone unfamiliar, someone who had broken an unspoken rule of existence. "You are destroying yourself," he said. But there was something else in his voice now. Something like fear, not of me, but of losing control over me. And in that moment, I understood something deeply. This was not just a confrontation about belief. It was a collision between two worlds that could no longer coexist. "I'm not afraid anymore," I said quietly. And it was true. The words surprised even me in their simplicity. He exhaled sharply, turning slightly as if trying to regain composure. "Then you leave me no choice," he said again, repeating the phrase from before. But this time, I felt no collapse inside me, no breaking, only clarity. "Which I know," I replied. That was all I said. No anger, no pleading, no defense, just acceptance. He stared at me for a long moment, searching for something that would pull me back. But nothing came. Not from him. Not from me. Finally, he turned away slightly, signaling the end. "Then you are no longer part of this family," he said. The words should have destroyed me. They should have shattered everything. But instead, they confirmed what I had already lived internally for weeks. The separation had already happened long before it was spoken. I nodded once, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. And I turned to leave. As I walked out of that room, I felt something strange. Not emptiness, not victory, but release. Like a final chain had fallen away, one I didn't even realize I was still carrying. No one stopped me. No one followed. And as I stepped outside into the open air, I realized something profound. I was no longer running from anything. I was walking towards something. And even though I did not yet know what the full future looked like, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was free. I don't remember the exact moment I stopped feeling like I was running away and started feeling like I was simply walking forward. It didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, like something inside me slowly learning how to breathe without fear. My life after that final confrontation did not suddenly become easy. In fact, in many ways, it became quieter, and silence has a way of revealing everything you used to distract yourself from. I no longer had the palace. I no longer had my family. I no longer had the name that once defined my place in the world. But for the first time in my life, I also no longer had to pretend. I lived in a small hidden space, far from the world that once revolved around me. There were no servants, no titles, no expectations written in gold, just me, my thoughts, and the growing awareness that something new had begun inside me. I spent my days reading, praying, and slowly learning what it meant to follow Christ in a world that did not understand it. There were moments of fear, yes, moments where the weight of everything I had lost would return suddenly, like a wave. I would think of my mother, my home, the version of my life that no longer existed, and my chest would tighten with grief. But even in those moments, something steadied me. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something deeper within it. And I began to understand that faith was not the absence of loss, but the discovery of something that remains when everything else is gone. I stayed connected to the small online community I had found earlier. They became my lifeline in ways I never expected. People from different countries, different backgrounds, all connected by one thing: a shared belief that Jesus was real, present, and alive in their lives. I never showed my face at first. I only listened. But even listening began to heal something inside me. Slowly, I started to speak. My voice at first was shaky, uncertain, as if I was still afraid that saying my story out loud might make it disappear. But it didn't. Instead, it grew stronger each time I shared it. And with every testimony I heard from others, I realized I was not alone in my journey. There were others who had also lost everything to follow what they believed was truth. That realization changed something deep within me. One night, long after everyone had left the call, I stayed behind in silence. The screen glowed softly in the darkness, and I found myself thinking about everything that had happened since the first moment of curiosity. The emptiness I once felt, the secret Bible reading, the confrontation, the exile, the encounter, the loss, the peace. It all felt like pieces of a story I was only beginning to understand. And for the first time, I didn't see my life as something destroyed. I saw it as something being rebuilt in a different way. Not around status, not around fear, but around truth. I whispered a prayer that night, simple and unpolished. Jesus, thank you for not leaving me. And in that quiet moment, I felt something settle in my heart, not as emotion, but as certainty. Time continued to pass. My life remained hidden, but it was no longer empty. I learned to find joy in small things, in quiet mornings, in scripture that spoke directly into my fears, in conversations with people who understood a part of my journey. I began to realize that identity was not something the world gave me or took from me. It was something being formed in me slowly, through every loss and every encounter with grace. There were still memories that hurt, still nights where I would sit quietly and think about the life I left behind. But even those memories no longer defined me. They were part of my story, not the end of it. One evening, I opened my phone and saw a message from someone I'd never met before. It simply said, "Your testimony helped me believe again." I stared at it for a long time, because in that moment, I understood something I had never considered before. My pain had become a bridge for someone else's hope, and that changed everything. I was no longer just someone who had lost everything. I was someone whose life had meaning beyond loss. I began to understand what it meant when it was said that nothing is wasted in God's hands, even the breaking, even the exile, even the silence. As I reflect now on everything that has happened, I no longer see a story of destruction. I see a story of transformation. Not because everything became easy, but because everything became true. I lost a kingdom, but I found a different one. Not built on power or fear, but on peace that does not depend on circumstances. And that peace has carried me further than anything I once called security. I don't know what the future holds completely, I still walk carefully. I still live with awareness of what my past means in the world I came from. But I'm no longer driven by fear. I'm guided by something steadier, something unshakable. And if there is one thing I want to leave with you, whoever is listening to this story, it is this. I thought I was losing everything when I left my old life. But I was not losing myself. I was finding the one who had been with me all along. And in him, I found a life I never knew was possible. A life not defined by what I lost, but by what I gained. Peace, truth, and freedom that no one can take away.